All right, welcome. I'm just going to give you a quick introduction and then we can go into your talk. Great. Okay, is everybody back? Yes. So I'm pleased to welcome Erwin Gianchandani, who is the NSF Senior Advisor for the new TIP Directorate, Translation, Innovation, and Partnerships, reporting directly to the Director of NSF. Before that, for 6 years, he was the NSF Deputy Assistant Director for SISE, Computer and Information Science and Engineering. So, very brief, but welcome, Erwin, and go ahead and take it away.
Thanks very much for having me today. It's great to be with all of you. I decided I would forego slides and actually just talk a little bit, if that's all right, and say a little bit about our thinking with respect to the proposed Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate. I can't quite discern all the faces in the room, but I have a sense I know some of the folks who are there, and it's really great to be able to join this group and say a little bit about the proposed directorate. So what I thought I would do is just talk a little bit about the concept. Why a new directorate? Why a new directorate now for the National Science Foundation? And then I know that this is leading into a discussion around public and private partnerships and particularly opportunities for academia to engage with a broader set of stakeholders. And so I'm hoping that I can say a few words about that too and still keep within the time that's allotted. So let me first start with a sense of the directorate. So I'm sure all of you have been tracking this in a variety of different forms. We have proposals out there for a new proposed directorate for technology and innovation in the Senate, in the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, and in the House, in the America Competes Act, there's a proposal for a directorate for science and engineering solutions. And then the president's budget request last spring called out a directorate for tech innovation and partnerships, or TIP. The last time NSF established a new directorate was 32 years ago, believe it or not. So I would argue that this is a once in a generation opportunity to really think about things in a different kind of way. And so it's in that spirit that we've been framing sort of the motivation for the directorate. So when I talk to folks externally on the Hill and others, in terms of the motivation, I sort of point to two key factors. One, if we think about society today, if we think about the nation and our local communities today, and we think about sort of the challenges that we face, we are facing a profound number of challenges across the landscape, whether it be climate change, and that takes on, of course, a variety of different forms with wildfires in the West Coast and hurricanes and tornadoes. We just saw a set in Iowa the last couple of days, just destructive, severe weather events. Whether it be equity, if you look back over the course of the last 2 years and this pandemic, which we're still fighting our way out of, I think the issues of equity and inequitable access to education and healthcare and even information in the form of broadband connectivity that provides access to information, we are seeing that really front and center in terms of the challenges that we face. Critical infrastructure. If you look at what happened, for example, in Texas last year, a little over a year ago, in response to the catastrophic winter storm that blew through and knocked out the power grid in the state of Texas. So those are 3-point examples of the kinds of challenges and the magnitude of challenges that we face. And you all in the room surely could enumerate a whole host of others that we face as well. At the same time, I would argue that if you look at the science and engineering enterprise that we are all a part of and that we all engage with at varying degrees on a day-to-day basis, I'm not just talking about the data science community proper, I'm talking about the broader science and engineering enterprise. We are witnessing at the same time sort of a profound set of changes there as well. In particular, if you look at the pace of discovery in every field of science and engineering, the pace of discovery has dramatically accelerated over the last decade. And that's because of the access to large amounts of data, heterogeneous types of data from a variety of different sensors, from a variety of different avenues that are really reshaping the way in which we conduct research, coupled with data science techniques and capabilities, AI techniques, machine learning capabilities, and so forth. So we're seeing changes in that realm. At the same time, if we think about our earliest career faculty and researchers and students, a lot of them would say they're going into science and engineering today specifically because they want to be able to have a positive net change with respect to some of those societal challenges that I described earlier. And then I think the third piece that I'll illustrate, and you could have your own set of changes that we're seeing in the science and engineering enterprise, but the third one that I'll highlight is the fact that we are today seeing a distribution of talent, science, technology, engineering, math, STEM talent across different sectors, be it academia, be it industry, be it nonprofits, be it foundations, be it state and local and tribal governments, and so on. A distribution of STEM talent that is greater than what we've seen maybe in times past. And so as a result, that calls upon us to think about ways in which we can intentionally cultivate blended teams that bring together folks from across different sectors in partnership to be able to conduct the research that we want to conduct. And so when you pair up the challenges that we face, the societal and economic challenges that we face, with sort of these fundamental transformations of the science and engineering enterprise that we are witnessing, you have an opportunity, we think, for a new way of approaching research-based approaches to solving some of these challenges. And in particular, I think this is the place where, when we talk about a Directorate for Technology and Innovation and Partnerships at the National Science Foundation, it has to be one that partners very closely with all of our existing directorates, with computing, with math and physical sciences, with biology, with engineering, and so forth. It has to partner closely with those directorates. And it has a particular focus on what I would call use-inspired basic research. So not applied research, which some folks might confuse with this directorate, but use-inspired basic research, as well as the accelerated translation of research results to practice. And that last piece, to me, is what really motivates us to think about public and private partnerships. We want to see opportunities by which we can bring together not just the research community that we have a long history of supporting out of NSF, but also bring together with the research community other stakeholders who can help to shape, who can help to motivate, who can help to inspire some of the research directions that we're seeking to pursue. So you think about folks in local communities, civil society, civic leaders. You think about private industry that wants to come in and help motivate some of the research questions we're trying to tackle. You think about communities of practice. How do we bring together those stakeholders with the research enterprise, the traditional research enterprise, if you will, the academic research enterprise, to be able to cultivate the kinds of co-design and co-creation of solutions, and then piloting of those solutions, prototyping of those solutions in those very same areas or geographic locations or what have you, where those problem scenarios are first emerging. And so to a large extent, that is the motivation that we have for why partnership. You know, oftentimes I talk about public and private partnerships in settings and folks say, is this all about money? You know, are we trying to grow the research pie? And I would argue that that is not what this is about. In fact, if we are trying to grow the research pie, we're sort of in a failure mode from the start. Right? What we're trying to do instead is we're trying to help bring together expertise, data sets, toolkits, test beds, a whole host of resources. Surely additional funding to help support and complement the research that we're trying to enable is always welcome. But we're really seeking those other intangibles, if you will, that can become tangibles that can really help to fuel the research that we're trying to support. And so as we think about this proposed TIP directorate and how it might interface with the computing directorate, how it might interface with the other parts of the foundation, we really come at it through the lens of how can we accelerate use-inspired research? How can we accelerate the translation of research results to the market and to society? And that doesn't, by the way, only mean small businesses and startups. That doesn't only mean thinking about new products for the market. It can mean other translational pathways whereby NSF-funded research can, for example, lead to open source ecosystems. NSF-funded research can serve to inform policy making by the other parts of the federal government. You could imagine wireless spectrum research, for instance, that can help to inform policy making by the FCC or NTIA, thinking about ways in which NSF-funded research can be taken up by governments, state, local, tribal governments across the country, and really adopt it in that sense. And so I think a key piece of this is, as we think about accelerating translation, it's accelerating translation across a myriad different pathways. And for us to do this right, we really see the criticality of trying to be able to build out these public-private partnerships that we're talking about this afternoon in this session. A couple other things that I'll just say, and I know my time is limited and you all have a breakout to get into, but a couple other points that I'll make is at the end of the day, as we think about this proposed directorate, one of the things that we are really focused on is education of the future workforce. This is not strictly about supporting research or strictly about supporting new emerging technology areas or the translation of those technology areas to practice. It's also about trying to train a diverse and broad-based workforce. What do I mean by that? Two things. One, I think you all would agree that there are opportunities for us to be able to do a better job of engaging with a broad set of institution types. Community colleges, for example, thinking about emerging research institutions. Now, there you go. Thinking about emerging research institutions, right? How do we engage? So I'll just take community colleges since I got a shout out about that a moment ago. If you think about that, I would argue that they are a vastly untapped treasure trove of talent for our country. And so how do we work collaboratively with community colleges to be able to create pathways for students to have access not just to curriculum, but curriculum that's constantly being refreshed to take into account some of the emerging technologies that we're seeing, curriculum that's being refreshed to prepare students for the jobs of today and tomorrow, and how do we provide students with complementary experiences in practice associated with that curricular in-classroom training. So for example, how do I give a student who's at a community college exposure to a job in private industry through an internship or an externship that gives them the complementarity that they need with what they're learning in the classroom so that they can be either better prepared for a job on day one, or they can be better prepared for going on to a degree from a four-year university or something to that effect, right? So that's one piece of this, is how do we tap into the set of institution types that really are reflective of the demography and the geography of our country. And then the second piece of this is the geography. At the end of the day, if all we do out of this directorate and out of the partnerships that we fuel, forgive me, if all we do is we fund schools on the coasts, we will have done ourselves a disservice. We need to find ways to be able to really tap into that full geography of innovation, as the National Science Board calls it, and really help motivate the problems that we're trying to tackle through those local level challenges and landscapes that we need to better realize. So with that, I think folks have already said this today, but I just want to double down on a couple of key points, and then I promise I'll stop talking and let you guys brainstorm. When we talk about public and private partnerships, and NSF, as some of you know, has strived to do this. We just announced, for instance, a $100 million partnership with Intel. They went out to Ohio and announced that they were going to do 2 chip-making fabs in just outside of Columbus, Ohio. And as part of that $20 billion investment, they're going to contribute $100 million together with NSF to support semiconductor design and manufacturing research and education at all different types of institutions, right? And so that type of a partnership, how does that emerge? We didn't go after it because of the money. No, we went after it because there was a trusted relationship that had been built up over nearly 8 years of working together with Intel, to be able to tackle a variety of different types of research questions in computing and in engineering. And as a result, Intel picked up the phone and said, hey, Erwin and NSF, we're really interested in trying to do something at the national scale as part of this Ohio announcement. Would you all be willing to work with us? So it takes trusted relationships. It takes recognizing sort of that notion of what is the value add? Why am I wanting to work with industry, and why does industry want to work with me? And that value add, that value proposition, if you will, on both sides has to be there in order to get to that trusted relationship. And finally, I can't stress it enough. At the end of the day, yes, one could make this about dollars. And surely when we talk with folks about what do our partnerships buy us, they do expand the amount of funding that we're able to provide to research and education by a bit. What they do even more so is they provide that expertise, they provide that access to a broad set of resources. And as part of that broad set of resources, they provide our students with exposure to real world problems and with pathways to potential future job opportunities. So I hope you'll think about some of these elements as you have your breakout sessions or your brainstorming over the course of the next hour in the atrium. I will just say that I think it is critically important for us as we think about the future of data science, as we think about the future of all sciences, which are increasingly going to intersect with data science, for us to think about these opportunities for public and private partnership, both in terms of research as well as education. And oh, by the way, in terms of the infrastructure, if you consider data as an infrastructure, the infrastructure that these resources can potentially bring to bear. So with that, I'll pause. I hope this is helpful context setting, and I apologize that I couldn't be there in person today, but I very much look forward to hearing about the outputs after the session. I can't hear you guys, just FYI.
Hi, Erwin, it's Sharon. So thank you so much. That was perfect. We're going to go into the other room and do the breakout session, and we're going to come back in here at 4:30. And each table will give a report back so that you can participate and hear the results of brainstorming about what that public partnership should look like with NSF in mind. I don't know if there's anything that you've been thinking about specifically that you wonder if academia would like or not, but now would be the time if there's an aspect that you're pondering. Otherwise, you know the bullets that will show in the other room, and we'll come back at 4:30.
So Sharon, am I too loud? Am I okay? Is the audio
You're
okay?
good. Am I screaming?
So just one thing that I was going to add to the bullets or to the conversation, if I may, is thinking about how we can incent, and I use this word with some degree of trepidation. Some folks get alarmed when I say it, but some degree of culture change, right? This is a little bit of, when we think about these types of partnerships, it's a little bit of culture change in the sense that, again, it comes back to that value proposition. As we think about value proposition here, the value proposition is not always going to result in publications and conference proceedings. The value add, the impact can take on a multitude of other forms. And I think to the extent that this group can sort of brainstorm how we elicit that, how we nudge that, I think that would really be interesting to see and hear as well.
Thank you. All right, I think we have our marching orders, and we will, Erwin, see you in about 40 minutes.
Great, thanks.
We didn't really assign questions, so I'm just going to ask for a volunteer, a report out from one of the tables. And come up here so Erwin can see and hear you.
Just so folks know, there are 2 mics on the side, so if we go to answer questions or anything, people can come up and step here.
Yeah, but they should report out.
For the outbrief of each table, we want you to go up to the podium to give the outbrief.
Yeah, and then is Erwin jumping in with questions or no? Yes?
Erwin, you can.
He can hear me.
I'm just going to listen.
Okay, well, if you have a pressing question, you can jump in.
For the purposes of flow and so forth.
Okay, good.
Erwin, you can feel free to ask like any clarifiers once each table briefs out. So
I see David coming down.
I know we had 6 or 7 tables, so can somebody, table number 1 wants to identify themselves? I know we assign people to do the outread.
We saw you typing.
So somebody's got to come on down for a table and give an outbrief. Good, thank you.
We're the outsiders. So I'm Abani Patra, I speak for the outsiders. So our table, this is going to be a stream of consciousness. I can do that now, can't I? So we had a stream of consciousness kind of conversation, so pardon the lack of flow yet. The first question that came up was, so what's in this for NSF-funded researchers? How does a private partnership or such things like Erwin you spoke of, how does that help us? So there is not a very clear answer yet, but we did take to heart the thing that it's not about the money. It's about getting good problems to work on. It's about translating the outcomes of our research and having an impact. That's the discussion we had. There were questions about how does this then go into the K-12 education pipelines, how those going to benefit from these things. Are there going to be direct connections? There was some exemplars brought up where certain universities have worked hard to make those connections and they have better employability of their students. Then we had a lot of good conversation about a couple of examples of specific things that have happened about industry partnerships. The Berkeley and J&J partnership was discussed at some detail about growing their data science fellows, who seems to be a very interesting and very nice example where industry seems to be paying most of the costs of developing what are almost mini startups. That's kind of the best way I can think about it, that they have an idea, that they hire a person, there's a faculty mentor, then there is a process of a couple of years by which there's some development of the project and a nice development of a person. There's a 2-year cycle there. So again, the translational research is embodied almost in the body of the researcher, which I found very interesting, that you translate the person, not just the work. This was, of course, a particular example in healthcare where I suspect there's enough resources to pay for it. There was some conversation about how this translates again to not just the research ones, but the research 2s and 3s and so forth. How can the TIP program you spoke of be more inclusive of those middle rung and lower rung research institutions? I think that's when we ran out of table time. Thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brandon McCoy. I'm from St. Louis University. Our group, we had a hard time really thinking of solutions. We did kind of discuss some of the issues and things that we thought might be problematic and tried to think of approaches that we could to negate them a bit. Some of the issues that we discussed was how do you maintain a sustainable program when it has a high amount of cost to start up, and then it only lasts for like 5-6 years because it's ever-changing and evolving industry. Sorry, look at my notes here. And then that was kind of involved into the continued conversation about the changing and evolving technology and approaches that are used by faculty and researchers, and trying to make sure that certain segments of the industry don't dominate it. So Google got brought up whenever we're discussing like machine learning and stuff like that. And then we kind of discussed open source, if that was an option, but there's issues with open source and we weren't really quite sure, how do you attack those problems, but kind of keeping that conversation going. Again, and then kind of revisiting the discussion of operational cost and the utilization, grant money, how it's being used capital-wise. So like faculty, if they already have a computing lab, do we use that funding for the lab, or do we capitalize on giving more equipment capabilities for the students? And then kind of the discussion of certain industries dominating within academia, trying to concentrate the efforts of addressing techniques and approaches in a more broader sense. So capstones was kind of mentioned briefly, kind of how that's all these capstone, all these projects and simulations are very industry created and driven. But that's coming in on the back end of it. So we thought that, even though it's a good idea, trying to address the capstone doesn't address the student while they're here. So kind of discussing, approaching, establishing how things are taught in a more open sense that can be used across the industry, even by nonprofits and government industries, and not just the larger corporations that are hiring. And we kind of discussed different possibilities of how that can be done, but it wasn't really any solutions really found. Just kind of discussing how that funding can be given to professors in practice, looking at how these technology is paid for and evolves. That's pretty much it.
Can you share what the issues around open source were? Or can somebody from that table maybe talk about what the views of open source issues were? No? Yep.
I'll try.
Okay.
I think so. I'm Azra Stavros, Boston University. I think the question came about related to.
Woohoo, go Josh.
How can we trust the black boxes that industry are making into platforms and so on, that they need to open up these systems so that first we can allow faculty and students to innovate on them, and second also to make sure that there's some sort of governance of this software, and universities probably are the best place to do this as the ones sort of think about us as the trusted part of society that can look into this and is not biased. Like, we can be seen as independent to some extent. So this could be a basis for maybe multiple companies working on machine learning to sort of create some sort of a consortium and then fund universities to dig into their code or make things available in open source and so on. I think that's the extent of the discussion. We talked about all sorts of other things too, but anybody else from that group wants to add to this? I think the very first point that was mentioned was very important, which is universities are long-term. When you introduce a new program, it's long-term. And starting a new center is going to go for another 5 years and we get $20 million. What happens after is always a question. And if you're going to build curricula and if you're going to do experiential learning, you do not want to do this. And then 5 years later, the university has to pay for the professors of the practice or whatever labs you set up. So the idea of sustaining education that industry may want to start because we are training their workforce, that is seen as a problem. I'm an associate provost. I can tell you that the university is not going to like to get a ton of money only to find themselves, having to continue it 5 years later. That's a problem. So the way to do this in universities is more the endowment way. Like, you actually have something that's going to go forever. But that's very hard to do. It's not clear how to do it with industry, or NSF for that matter.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. All right, another table. I know there were 6 at least. Good. All right.
We're going to tag team.
Woohoo.
No, we didn't take notes, so I'm the data backup.
Nice, nice.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Charlie Pegian. I'm at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee, and my partner is...
I'm Cliff Stein. I'm the interim director of the Data Science Institute at Columbia University.
And so we had an amazingly lively conversation, and let's focus on something real quick. Industry partnerships. When we think of NSF, we think about our research, and we've gotten in that habit that what we do research-wise, we want to get funded. Think of it in terms of industry partnerships. Is that what you're comfortable doing? And that's what a lot of our conversation went to, is if you're a faculty member that's now asked to go get an industry partnership and go through that hassle. And it's hard, and you're not external. You're somebody that's normally within a university environment. Are you comfortable doing that? And so some of you may be, that's maybe why you're here, but is the normal faculty member ready for that? So, we took that culture change mentality pretty seriously when we heard that. And so how do you create that culture change so that it incentivizes people to want to create those partnerships? If there has to be some type of support there. We all know that every time you do a partnership, there's long-term contracts you have to look at. There's a lot of people involved. You need to be the champion. It can't be the company, because if it's the company, it's gonna die because they're too busy and they've got too much bureaucracy to go through as well. So you need to be that. So how do you create those support mechanisms and put those in place? I know that was a lot of it. Okay, where do we go from there?
Yeah, and also that there's, and related to that is there's an equity issue that, if you're at a big university, there may be, an infrastructure for doing this, but you're a faculty member at some place where there isn't the infrastructure. It's very daunting, right? Even if you're willing to do the work, who do you call up? How do you get started? And so there needs to be some way to address that. I think that general equity issue of how do you make these interactions? I think another thing we spoke about was the benefit of regional hubs and regional partnerships, that it could be helpful for groups of companies and universities in an area to form these hubs. And that could give a way to have this industry academic interaction and a way to make it more sustainable, right? That it's not these one-offs, that it's done with a group.
Yeah, and then just lastly, well, first of all, I love the idea of regional, which leads to proof of concept and then go national. Don't think national first. And I hope that regional approach is embraced. And then lastly, we talked about different types of ways that partnerships can be. It doesn't have to just be, or you as a faculty member and a company. Why can't a tech council or an organization within your community be that hub? And why can't we incentivize those relationships? Because one thing that I got lucky with was by getting on a tech council 10 or so years ago, that now got me access to every company within our region, and that made it a lot easier. And so most of our programming is, especially from an education and academic and industry partnerships, go through our tech council, and it makes it a lot easier. So the thinking outside of just, I need to now go find somebody, that's too hard, I'm not gonna do it. Thinking differently about it, I think that's what can lead to culture change as we look for these types of partnerships. So.
Do we have anything else from our group? Or?
Come to the mic. Want to come to the mic?
Oh, this. Or do you want?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we talk about this issue, right, of the incentives within academia, the tenure process, right? That we need some way to recognize, working with industry, working these interdisciplinary ways may lead to things that aren't just publications in journals and conferences. And so, how do you change the culture of the university so people are willing to get involved in this, and that they're rewarded for it appropriately, right? I think that's. Yes. Cool. We did. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
All right, we still have, come on up. Or come on down, whatever the direction is.
on The Price is Right.
Yeah.
Hi, so I'm Leah Shanley from the International Computer Science Institute, and Dr. Talitha Washington and her students Victoria and Wumi were at our table, David Bader, Josh Greenberg, and Eli Alahajar. So we talked about a few things. The first is Josh had indicated there's a new approach called quadratic matching funds, which I'll let him comment on afterwards, that allows, rather than an individual linear matching where one donor might dominate, the quadratic method mitigates for that domination of a single donor and optimizes across partners. We talked a lot about the challenges in the current NSF ICURC model, particularly that it requires IP agreements up front, which those who have worked in that space said that can often be a non-starter with industry because the research hasn't actually started yet. Also, the challenge of it requires high membership fees, plus you get dinged with overhead on that front. And as a nonprofit research institute, I've discovered that we can't be a co-PI or co-leader in something like that. So there was comments at the table of the need for more of a updated model for this from the NSF. We had the added benefit of having 2 students at our table. So we were very excited to really focus heavily on the experiential learning part of the discussion. And the students and the faculty at our table said that it would be interesting to be able to bring in industry speakers once a month to classrooms, so the students could be regularly exposed to an array of industry partners. Opportunities for students to shadow industry colleagues, either for a day or a week or a month. Internships and fellowships, but we could be creative in that regard. There's a model, for example, out of the South Big Data Hub called the Data Start Fellowship, where we matched graduate students with startup companies for a summer, research projects. REUs are an opportunity. Somebody mentioned the UCLA's GRIPS is leveraging an REU that works with industry. And then there was a lot of emphasis on the opportunity for industry sabbaticals for faculty. I think PEPIGEA, again out of the South Hub, is one model. But that would allow researchers and faculty, other teachers, to develop, exposure to the emerging technology and bring that back into the classroom, and also spur academic and industry innovation. And then lastly, opportunity for mentorship from industry partners. Back when I was a grad student, we had something called MentorNet that was kind of like Match.com for mentors. And you put in your profile and it gave you 5 options, and you found somebody that for a year, you met with them once a week from industry or one of the national labs. And talking to our students, one of them was on a weekly basis talking with someone from Ericsson. And I think the other student also had connections with industry where somebody was mentoring the student along the way. Anyone from our group want to add something? No, Josh, do you want to mention what the quadratic? No, you're saying no. Oh. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we definitely have 2 more tables. Go ahead, David.
Thought going earlier meant I didn't have to do it again. Hi, I'm David Uminski. I'm the Executive Director of the new Data Science Institute at the University of Chicago. We wanted to go on a lot. This opened up a wide set of conversations, but we actually were most inspired and actually just well matched to jump on this line that Erwin, you mentioned around the untapped talent at community colleges. For us, this was part and parcel. For example, as we, at our table itself was actually had a lot of community colleges, state schools, not necessarily all, there was several R1 universities at it. And I was inspired and also then remit by the first opening comment at the table, which was, ooh, I'm not sure I'm qualified to comment on this one, which really tells you where the ambition can really be if the NSF is quite serious about thinking about the community colleges. And it also has inspired a lot of the work that I've been focusing on, being an R1 institution, but focusing directly with community colleges. So I would say our call really in this case is be very ambitious when you think about the work you want to do with industry, community colleges. And what we would argue is a third pillar needed, which is the sort of the 4-year or research university member in that case. One-on-one right now, as was commented on by the people on the table, it's a hard conversation for a community college to approach a company on something meaningful. It is not something that had a high hit rate. And similarly, depending on if you're not in California, it's a hard conversation for the community college to have with an elite research university and talk about what are the meaningful collaborations. But as it turns out, as we sat there at the table, there's a need for industry to play this role, which is really sort of 3-way mutually beneficial. Community colleges and the university can have a great benefit in partnership when we think about co-capacity building around education, not just pathways, but really capacity building for the community college. But in all cases, community colleges and the research university, industry has to play a critical role to make a lot of that happen, particularly in data science. For example, We can't start a new AA degree in the community colleges of Chicago without there being a vetted apprenticeship and job model for that new degree to be, that's just a part of the rule and the state rule, and it's very similar at many community colleges. Community colleges want to start that program, but they don't necessarily have the initial resources or expertise in data science to get that going, which they can get from the university system. So there's this way to think about being ambitious, but also thinking someone said focused regionally. I don't know what's below that, but I would focus hyper-locally on these models where the companies are local and there's an opportunity to build a real relationship between the community colleges and those companies through the partnership with the university system that's there as well. This will reestablish long dormant pathway programs that don't really exist outside of some very good examples in California and other places. And in the case of a private university, almost non-existent at all. And so, we ran out of time thinking about the number of ways we could get things going, but you really needed this tripod. And that's where I think the NSF can really think about being ambitious. And if one of the things that comes out of this is a meaningful, real way for community colleges to re-engage outside of the DUE, for example, which is one of the few areas that they do think about being, a very strong place for them to engage, there'd be a huge win right there. The untapped talent is enormous. The numbers are terrible. It was quoted at our table that, and this is a rule of thumb, for every 100 students that say, I want to get a degree in computer science that start at a community colleges, approximately 1 do within 6 years. So if we made that 4, which is a horrible number, that's an enormous lift. And I think it's going to be through a very creative way, and I think this new directorate is precisely the right one to do it in. Did I miss anything else? Okay.
I want to add that the first U.S. Chief Data Scientist of the United States, DJ Patel, went to a community college at the start of his career.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on to that, it is shocking the number. So when I talk about the partnerships we've started with our community colleges, it is shocking the number of extremely high-level CEOs, CTOs, and founders that immediately said, I went to one. My mom went to one. It touches everyone. It's a weird thing in the US, how important and unique it is, but it really does touch a lot of people's lives, and you don't know it until, I should almost raise your hand, anyone go to a community college in this room? Yeah, I don't know if you could see that. So, that is its own profound opportunity that I think you articulated quite well. All right.
Awesome, thank you so much. And we have 1 or 2 more tables, for sure 1 more. Did we lose a table? All right, nothing like peer pressure. We need you to be the star of the show.
And my name is Quinn Liu. I'm from University of Oklahoma. I didn't take note for what we discussed, but I think a lot of our members, the people sit on our table, talk about experiential learning. And because actually one of the reasons was we started talking about it's really not an easy task for faculty to find the niche and the common interest for a research project with industry partners. I know some of you have had success, but it's not easy, and it really takes a lot of time, even thinking about the pressure of pre-tenure faculty. But in terms of experiential teaching, a number of our members on our table have had experience either as graduate students or as a faculty member, like teaching capstone, and some of our members have had colleagues who had NSF grant, which help build a really strong partnership with the local companies. But the problem comes is the sustainability, right? Sometimes when the grants runs out or some faculty leaves and the change of personnel, that's a challenge. And for my own experience, when I teach capstone class for experiential learning, one of the tricky thing is you will have to pitch to the industrial partner a project that is not too big or not too small. And you will have to tell them there's no guaranteed success because it's educational experience. And there's no customer service after 16 weeks. Yeah, so I usually have to put all those cautions up front, and then still I would have to tell them, you still need to invest time in your students because they will ask you questions over the semester. So that's been, I mean, some of them are really nice to work with us, and we have had some connections and some projects, but it's not always easy to do all of those things. And did I miss anything, or members would like to add? I think we discussed lots of challenges, but we may not always have all the solutions. Thank you.
So I had counted 6 or 7 tables, but I'm imagining, is there anybody else that wanted to speak? It's 5:03, but we have some, I see no volunteers. So Erwin, unless you have do you have any questions for anybody or for anyone in the audience?
So I don't have any questions. I did just want to thank you all for engaging in the conversation and taking sort of my prompt at the beginning of this session to heart. It was really interesting to hear some of those report outs, in particular, thinking about incentive structures, thinking about joint appointments, shared appointments across sectors, thinking about new models. So fair enough about the IUCRC program, for instance, thinking about new models from NSF when it comes to IP, or more generally, one of the things that I say when it comes to IP is, actually was in a meeting this morning and I made this comment and a lot of folks nodded heads. How much are we actually making off of the license, off of the IP, right? When it comes to universities, more often than not, we should be thinking about new models that move us away from IP. So that certainly resonated with me. And I appreciate the point about, we have an opportunity to be very ambitious here when it comes to the relationship between community colleges, four-year institutions, industry, and others. And in particular, when I say being very ambitious, how do we move away from the pairwise relationships that I think are really, industry is very interested in engaging with community colleges today for a good reason, but often does so on a one-off basis, a one-off here, a one-off there. And so how can we sort of elevate and really lift up those collaborations into something that's much more of a national fabric? So we're thinking about that. But in a nutshell, I just wanted to thank everybody for the brainstorming. If folks have other thoughts, please send them my way. I'm all ears. Those of you who know me in the audience know I try to be responsive to email, and we'll look forward to continuing this conversation. This is not the end. This is the beginning of, I hope, a longer conversation with this proposed directorate.
Great. Thank you so much, Erwin. And thanks, everybody. And we now get to have a cocktail hour, Erwin. So
enjoy.
all right.